Part 1, Why We Care About Phosphorus and Phosphorus Sustainability. In the most simplest way, we care about phosphorus because it's required for all living things to grow. In fact, phosphorus is an essential nutrient for animals, plants, and microbes, facilitating their cell development, and is a key component of molecules that store energy, such as ATP, store and process genetic information, such as DNA and RNA, and form cell membranes, such as phospholipids. Phosphorus is so essential that the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, lists the recommended daily allowance, or RDA, of phosphorus as 700 milligrams for adults and 1,250 milligrams for children ages 9 through 18. The larger RDA for children reflects their need to use phosphorus to grow. In our case as humans, we store most of that phosphorus in our bones and teeth. And phosphorus makes up about 1 to 1.4% of our fat-free mass. Phosphorus is similarly critical to growing healthy plants and crops, including those in agriculture and used to produce food. In agriculture, phosphorus is an essential element in fertilizers and is the primary driver for plant growth. In the photograph on the left, you can see an experimental field in which different areas are made phosphorus sufficient, meaning the plant is given sufficient levels of phosphorus during fertilization. This is the area in the back where the plants are taller. And other areas are made phosphorus deficient, meaning that the plant is given insufficient levels of phosphorus during fertilization. This is the area in the front where the plants are shorter. So we see here in a single photograph that in agriculture, phosphorus is tied to plant growth. Phosphorus and plant growth are also important to grow more crops per land area. In agriculture, the term yield measures that quantity. That is to say, yield is a measure of the amount of a crop grown per unit area of land. If we look to a crop like corn, for example, one could use bushels per acre as a measure of yield. In the graph shown here, bushels per acre are plotted against time from the year 1866 to 2021. We can see that yields were relatively flat prior to the year 1940, even showing a relatively small decline in the 20s and 30s. Then around 1940s, the yields of crops started to steadily increase due to the intentional application of more mineral fertilizers like phosphorus, a fact that we'll explore deeper in the next couple of minutes. And crop yields have risen steadily since. Look to the 1960s and 70s, for example. Among other things, this steady increase is attributed to the introduction of new crop varieties, which also utilized more and more phosphorus. Now, back to this inflection point in the 1940s. In 1938, the U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt elevated the concepts of soil conservation and soil fertility with the element phosphorus into the public in a speech to Congress. He started his speech by stating that the U.S. was facing a continuing loss of its agricultural production capacity related to reduced yields, as we learned previously, and that phosphorus was key to solving this problem. And he said specifically, I cannot overemphasize the importance of phosphorus, not only to agriculture and soil conservation, but also to the physical health and economic security of the people of the nation. His speech was informed by tests at the time, one of which is shown in this photograph here. That application of phosphate demonstrated an ability to encourage growth of vegetables. He further spoke about how the phosphorus content of our land had diminished after generations of cultivation, in which plants took it up and much of it eroded. There was a need to replenish phosphorus in soils. He went on to say that a high level of productivity can only be maintained when phosphorus is returned to the soil, and that addition of phosphorus to the soil must be made largely, if not entirely, in the form of fertilizers, which are derived principally from phosphate rock. And before moving on to discuss the subsequent growth in phosphate rock mining, it's important to note the timing of this event, which was before the U.S. entered World War II. After the war, from the mid-1940s to the 1960s, a population boom occurred, significant enough to be called a baby boom. And it was the growth of mined phosphate rock and its subsequent use in fertilizers that helped feed the growing population of the U.S. during that time period. Now let's look at the global amounts of phosphorus used in fertilizers manufactured from various sources over approximately 200 years. In this graph, we see two primary sources of phosphorus for fertilizers: phosphorus from mined phosphate rock in red and phosphorus from manure in green. Up to around 1940, there was a slow growth globally in phosphorus used in fertilizers and sourced both from manure and phosphate rock. Then starting in 1945, the amount of phosphate rock used in the production of fertilizers greatly accelerated, while the use of manure plateaued. Again, with the growth of population experienced after World War II, these fertilizer sources were used to produce food to feed the growing human population. Note in this plot also that a further inflection in fertilizer phosphorus from phosphate rock occurs in the 1960s, after which the growth rate accelerates further. During this time period, the world developed and introduced new crop varieties, including varieties that further increased yields. These high crop varieties required much greater quantities of fertilizer to achieve those high yields, further increasing the demand for fertilizers produced from phosphate rock. This time period is known as the Green Revolution. Now, we'll close this first part of the module. Hopefully, it's now clearer why phosphorus is important to life and how it is critical to sustaining humanity through our agricultural food system.